Hi, welcome back to another video. I've got a pretty big project coming up pretty soon in a future video, and I thought that I would break it down into smaller parts. So today, I need to make some zombie hands, and I want them to be posable, and I'm going to take you through that process. By the way, I have a lot of skulls here, so my work area, I'm calling it the skull pile. I found this zombie hand at the dollar store, and it's pretty good. It's a good size, and its pose isn't that bad, but it's only a left hand, and I need both a right and a left hand. So let's make something from scratch. And we're going to make it out of this. It's upholstery foam. It's about 1 inch thick. And I'm also going to use aluminum armature wire. This can be easily bent into shape by hand. So I'll start by tracing my hand onto the foam. I'm just using a Sharpie here. And then I'm going to use a utility knife to cut it out. Now I stacked 2 pieces of foam here in hopes that I could cut out both hands at the same time. I ran into some difficulty with that and found out that it was just easier to trace my hand a second time onto the other piece and then cut it out from there. And I used a combination of scissors along with the utility knife to cut it out. And now we've got a left and a right hand. I'm going to label them left and right so that I remember to keep them that way. Now we're going to make the bones of the hand. So I'm going to line up the wire all the way almost to the tip. You don't want to go all the way to the tip, but you want to go close. And I'm going to leave some hanging out the back end because I need to attach this hand later on to something. And I'll do that for each of the 5 fingers. And now for this next step, I'm just going to slide some plastic up underneath it because we're going to hot glue these together. We'll flip it over and put some hot glue on the other side. And we'll use some twine that will hot glue around it, twist it around, glue it all into place. This is just going to help keep it together. Now I'm going to pose the wires better to fit in the hand, and I'm going to cut a slit in the foam that only goes halfway deep. Be very careful not to cut yourself. By the way, I apologize if my audio is annoying. I'm recording in an unusual location and circumstances, so there seems to be a lot more computer and ambient noise, so sorry if you're picking that up. After cutting all of the slits and a gap for the wrist area, now I'm going to slide the wires into those gaps and embed them in the middle of the foam. And to hold them together, I'm going to use contact glue. This is barge, but any contact cement will work. I'm just going to run a thin amount of contact cement down into the gaps, making sure to get some on the wires as well as both sides of the slit. And I'm also going to paint a thin layer of contact cement across the top surface of each of the fingers. And we'll just let that dry. As you know, contact cement sticks together once it's dry. So now that it's dry, we're going to pinch together each of those gaps to close them up. And to round off the fingers, we're actually going to pinch the tops together of each of the fingers, and it will bring a nice roundness to the top of the finger. You can see here the rounded tops. Now to cover the wires in the wrist, I'm just cutting some more pieces of foam here. I'm shaping them with scissors to get a little rounded area, and we're going to glue that on with contact cement as well. And that will cover up the wrist area. Now I'm going to spend some time with scissors shaping and sculpting these fingers, rounding off the corners with thin little cuts, just a little bit at a time, not too fast, and gradually rounding it out. Also the fingertips, everything that I need to get a hand shape on there. You can see the difference here between one that's been sculpted into shape and one that's not. Now let's create the pose. We're going to start with the first knuckle. And I'll bend each of the fingers there, and then I will bend the rest of the knuckles, and we're doing kind of a grabbing shape similar to that initial plastic one that we looked at the beginning. I realize in this pose that we're going to need some meat in the palm of the hand, so I get a little piece of foam and I'm going to connect that in with contact cement. I also need to seal the foam, and so I am going to cover the entire surface of the hand with a thin coating of the contact cement and just let that dry. Now I did a test here where I only did that on one hand to see if I could do it without sealing it, and you can, but it really works so much better if you seal it with the contact cement first. So I suggest doing that if you're doing something like this. So now we're going to make the skin. I'm going to use a disposable brush and liquid latex, and then tissue like Kleenex or toilet paper. And this toilet paper, you know, it has like a quilted pattern on it, doesn't matter. So we'll coat the entire surface with a layer of liquid latex. And while that's still wet, we're going to take some of the toilet paper and we'll just lay it down on top of that. This will make the actual skin. And it's going to make a really cool effect. So what we're going to do here is now coat the toilet paper with another layer of liquid latex. The first layer is still wet, so we're just working on top of wet. And it makes lots of little creases and bubbles and shapes that look like old wrinkled skin. And I want the anatomy of the ligaments on the back of the finger, so I'm just going to roll up some toilet paper, lay them out across the back of the hand, coat that in wet latex, and then put another layer of toilet paper over top of it and coat that with wet latex. Once I've covered the entire hand this way, then we're going to go ahead and set it aside and let it dry, and I let this dry overnight. I also added knuckles with little balls of tissue. This is what it looks like after a day. The white areas are the areas that didn't have quite as much latex over the top of it, but if you feel it, it's all very rubbery and it's got a great texture and even some little skin areas. Now, liquid latex is similar to contact cement in that when it's dry, it sticks to itself, and we're going to take advantage of that to make the fingers a little more, or a little less chunky, a little more bony. So if you take them and you just kind of squeeze them together, they will stick to each other, to themselves, and look a little more skeletal. We're going to add fingernails on this. I'm just using cheap plastic fingernails from the dollar store. You can see they're going to look great. So to prepare that, we're going to do another layer of latex and tissue skin. And when we get to the fingers, I'm going to hot glue each of the fingernails on. Now to make them a little grosser, some of them I cut the tips off of, broke them. Even some of the fingernails I didn't even put on the fingernail, like it had fallen off. And we're going to put liquid latex all around it, including, it's okay if you get it on the fingernail itself, and you wrap tissue around the fingernail and then coat that with a layer of wet latex. And now while it's wet, I'm going to use a silicone sculpting tool and kind of push away the paper around the fingernail to make like a cuticle and a nail bed. And I wanted to add a little bit of extra detail, so here on this part we're going to have some exposed bone. So I'm using the same sculpting tool to just kind of push the tissue out of the way to make a bone thing. Now dry latex is really easy to clean up from a flat plastic surface. It just peels off or rubs off, but it does not come off of clothing or hair very easily, so be careful with that. Now we're going to paint, and for our paint we're actually going to mix some liquid latex with our craft paint. This is a light beige color. It's because I'm trying to match a mask that goes along with the hands. So the mask starts out with this beige color, so we're going to give it the same undercoat. I added a little bit of water. It was just regular water to thin it out, and we're going to coat the entire surface with this. And let it dry. Now this is the next day, or several hours later. We're doing another base coat, and this is gray. And it's watered down a little bit more than the beige coat was, because I kind of want to see it through the skin. This is what it looks like after drying. And you know, I've got the latex and the paint all over the fingernails, but you can just rub it right off. Let's make these fingernails look gross though. So I'm going to use a utility knife to just gently scrape lines, parallel lines going along the length of it. And then we're going to use some burnt umber and some water. And this does not have the latex mixed with it. This is just the regular craft paint. I'm just going to paint it right on. This is similar to what I do when I'm painting bones. We're just going to cover the fingernails completely. Make sure to get underneath the fingernails. Because they're translucent, you'll be able to see that. And while it's still wet, we'll just wipe it off. Now that paint's going to stick down inside all of those little scratches we made with the utility knife. And it gives it a very realistic and pretty disgusting look. Okay, we're going to do one more layer of colored wash. This is with the latex paint, so it's the liquid latex mixed with the pigment, with the craft paint, and then mixed with a bunch of water. Here I'm using burnt umber and a little bit of black to make a dark brown. And it's wetter than any of the two previous latex layers that we painted on. I want this to go down into every little deep recess. We're just going to cover the whole thing, and while it's still wet, we're going to rub it off. This will leave behind the dark in the deepest areas. This is what it looks like wet, and it's always a little bit darker once it dries. Here it is dry. And this looks pretty good, but we want to add just a little bit more life or undeadness to it. So we're going to layer on more colors. And yeah, we're going to start with a crazy green. This is like a teal green and a forest green mixed together and mixed with water. I'm just going to blotch it in certain areas and then pretty immediately wipe it off. It's going to leave just a little bit of green tint in various areas. And now we're going to do the same thing with a deep red color. This is kind of like a burgundy, but any red will work, just like almost any green will work too. We're going to put it in different areas and then wipe it off. And now one last layer like this, we're going to use burnt umber, do the same thing. And you can see together it just adds so much more life to the whole thing. Now let's paint that bone. We're going to paint it with an off-white and then do the same thing. Once it's dry, we're going to do the same thing we did with the fingernails. Burnt umber, we're going to paint it, cover the whole thing with burnt umber watered down with a little bit of paint, and wipe it off. Give us a little bit of bone look. And that is done. Let's take a look at it. These zombie hands turned out so creepy and I love them. They're going to work great in the upcoming project. If you want to see how I'm going to use these, make sure you subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss the future video when it comes out. Also, if you like this video and you think other people might like it, make sure to leave a thumbs up so that YouTube knows that they should let other people know about it. If you have any other great ideas, leave a comment down below. Until next time though, don't be bored, be creative.